Okay, no problem. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Camila Perussello. I am a food scientist. So I started my career graduating in food engineering almost 20 years ago in Brazil. Then a few years later, I got a master's degree in mechanical engineering, more specifically in the field of thermal sciences applied to food production. And then 5 years later, I got a PhD in food engineering in 2013. So really, my area of expertise is actually very broad. It includes food formulation design, food processing, and valorization of agri-food waste and byproducts. I'm obviously vegan. My philosophy is animal rights. So I support plant-based foods. And as everyone knows, the food industry, especially here in Ireland, is unfortunately heavily reliant on animals. So a couple of years ago, I decided to leave my job as a researcher in a renowned university here in Ireland, in Dublin, to focus on animal liberation. So that's when I started to write a book called Food for Thought, Planetary Healing Begins on Our Plate, which is a science-based book on the intersection of food production, animal rights, and human rights. And nowadays, I split my time consulting for the food industry to help companies transition away from animal foods. And I also run a small business in the field of scientific writing, where I help other scientists have their research published. So that's basically what I do and who I am. It works. Okay, so again, everyone, thank you so much for joining. It's a real pleasure to be here. And tonight we are going to discuss animal welfare in the food industry. So as I always do, I would like to start with an icebreaker. So some simple questions just to provoke reflection. So please look at this picture and concentrate on how you feel about it and what it means to you. People are different, so there's no right or wrong here. You may either see a type of food, or you may feel upset by the sight of animal flesh. Or maybe there's even a third option, it doesn't matter. So whatever the case is, just think of how you feel about this picture. Okay, now, what if I told you this is actually dog meat? Does it change how you feel about the first picture? And if it does change, why? And now I ask you to be really honest with yourself. What if I told you the dogs are free range? They are also raised organically in a local farm run by a family, and they are humanely slaughtered. Does it change anything? So what do you think is the moral problem with eating dogs, if you think there's any? One may say that dogs are friends, they are pets. Others may say that it's a cultural taboo, they're just not used to eating dogs. Or others may even say it goes against their religion, which may even seem reasonable arguments to some people, but we can do better than that and really reach the core of the question, which is animal sentience, the ability of other animals to feel. So this is quite obvious, but animals experience a wide range of emotions and physical sensations. And this is scientific consensus. Okay, so everyone knows that, unlike objects and plants, animals have a nervous system, so they are able to feel physical sensations, pain, and also emotions. And they have a personality, they have own interests and preferences. So from the biological point of view and also the moral point of view, there's no difference between pets and farmed animals. They are all sentient. And the difference between pets and farm and food animals is fabricated. However, although there is no doubt that animals are sentient beings, 80 billion land animals and trillions of aquatic animals are killed to become food every year. And we do this despite the damaging effects of animal products on both human health and the health of the planet. So even if one doesn't care about the suffering of others, animal use is not even intelligent. But let's talk about animal welfare. According to animal welfare proponents, animals can be used as long as they are treated humanely, whatever that means. Which brings us back to our discussion about dog meat. Is treatment the central question here? Now, you might be thinking, what is animal welfare anyway? So animal welfare is the physical and emotional well-being of animals, including those animals raised for human consumption. And welfare is measured by different metrics, which cover the animal's behavior and clinical indicators, and also other factors. For example, absence of diseases and injuries, absence of fear and distress, and freedom from pain. These standards are regulated both by legislation and private certification schemes. And the guidelines include housing standards, husbandry practices, diet, and so on. These guidelines will also depend on the context. For example, if we are talking about a zoo, of course, the size of the cages will be different from the size of the cages on a farm. If we are dealing with a farm located in a tropical climate, then the requirements will not be the same as in a farm located in a cold region, and so on. So context is really important in defining the welfare of an animal or a group of animals. But here we will focus on food production. So in theory, animal welfare regulations seek to support the humane use of animals. I don't know about you, but to me, the very term humane use sounds like a contradiction. We use things, we use inanimate objects, not sentient beings. But very frequently, we hear people who consume animal products claim they don't harm animals because animal welfare regulations ensure the animals are well treated. So let's examine this statement. Starting from the obvious. In the food industry, animals have three main options. Number one, they are brought into existence just to be killed when they reach the slaughter weight. Second, they are captured in the wild and killed. Or third option, they are bred, used, and killed when no longer profitable. So in the first case, we are talking about land animals who are raised for their flesh. In the second case, we are talking about aquatic animals. And in the third case, we are talking about, for example, dairy cows and birds who are used for their secretions, milk, eggs, and foie gras, for example. So animal use and suffering are inseparable. No matter the production system or the type of food we are talking about, whether it's meat, dairy, fish, or eggs, it's impossible to ensure high levels of welfare all the way from breeding to slaughter. For instance, when an animal is killed, pain and fear are unavoidable. When we separate a newborn from the mother, sadness and fear are inevitable. So animal welfare really means little in an exploitative system where all kinds of cruel practices are standard and many times unavoidable. So to sum up the idea, it's impossible to use sentient beings in a humane or compassionate way. Let's take the example of the slaughter of pregnant animals. And first of all, I must highlight that the killing of pregnant animals is a standard practice in animal agriculture. It's not the exception, it's the rule. So this happens whenever the animal is not deemed profitable anymore. For example, dairy cows whose milk production declined. So in this paper published by the European Food Safety Authority in 2017, they set guidelines to reduce the suffering of pregnant females during slaughter, which is a perfect paradox, because if you want to prevent suffering, why use and kill animals anyway? You see, there's no such thing as kinder violence. And now let's talk about the lower welfare levels for aquatic animals. For fishes, for example, I know the word fishes is not grammatically correct, but we often use it to emphasize that these animals are individuals. We are not talking about fish as a group, but also as individuals. So aquatic animals were the last class of animals used as food to be studied in terms of sentience. Despite the widespread evidence of fish sentience, the European legislation set welfare recommendations only 13 years ago in 2009. And the main obstacle in establishing specific welfare standards for these types of animals is that too many species are exploited in aquaculture and fishing. And husbandry methods, feed, housing, and slaughter methods must be tailored to each species according to their biological and behavioral characteristics. So there aren't many welfare guidelines in the legislation for this class of animals. And in practice, even when the guidelines do exist, they are rarely observed. In most cases, no matter if we are talking about large scale or small scale fishing, the animals are just tossed, clubbed, pierced, placed on ice, and opened alive with no concern for their ability to suffer. And yes, of course, I agree that animal use is widespread and legal, but the question is it ethical? I mean, it's 2022. There's no doubt that animals feel pain and fear. Plus, we don't need animal products to be healthy and happy, quite the opposite. We not only have medical research backing this up, but also there are approximately 80 million people in the world thriving without consuming animal products, including me. Then I ask you, in this day and age, what is the morally relevant justification for breeding animals into existence to eat their body parts and secretions? I leave this question for you to think about it. So terms like free range, cage-free, humane slaughter, and so on are supposed to convince the consumer that the animals had a happy life and died peacefully with no pain and no fear. But these terms do not reflect the real farming practices. I will soon explain what exactly these terms mean so you can draw your own conclusions. It's also important to consider that animal welfare claims are exaggerated. We saw the case of the killing of pregnant females, right? So if farmers have the legal right to genetically modify, forcibly impregnate, confine, mutilate, and kill the animals, then animal welfare regulations do very little to protect them from suffering. And please have in mind that all these practices I just mentioned are standard practices in food production. And it's quite common to hear omnivores claim they only buy products from higher welfare farms. And by that, they usually mean local, organic, or free-range farms. But first of all, nearly all of us eat out and eat processed food. So it's impossible to claim that all animal-based foods you consume are organic or free range. Secondly, the animals undergo a life of exploitation regardless of the production system. They are bred and raised for economic purposes. So let's take the example of organic chickens raised in a small farm. They are as commodified as factory farmed chickens. They're killed for money. So let's see a second example, milk production. Whether we are talking about organic or conventional milk, cows are still forcibly impregnated time and time again, because of course mammals only produce milk if they are pregnant or nursing their babies. We know that because we are mammals too. So once the cows give birth, their babies are taken away so they don't drink their milk. The cows are then milked several times a day for approximately 10 months a year. And after around 5 years, they are killed because their milk production declines. So, of course, no economic opportunity is lost in the industry. So these animals usually become second-graded meat. Just for perspective, in Ireland, 60% of the beef produced locally come from the dairy herd. So the babies, the calves, they have three main options. One, if they are females, they will replace their mothers in this horrible cycle. Second option, if they are males, most of them are killed because they are valueless, they don't produce milk. Or third options, the calves, both male and female, can be sent to veal farms to be fattened up until slaughter at around 3 months of age. And many of them are sent to distant markets where the animal welfare standards are even lower. And again, all of this is standard practice. It's not the exception, it's the rule. A third example is pig meat production. So no matter if the pigs are caged or free range, females are still inseminated against their will 2 to 3 times a year, only to have their babies torn away to become bacon and pork. And when their fertility declines, the females are killed after a few years of emotional and physical suffering. And this happens regardless of the production system and herd size. Another example about fish. Fishes go through all kinds of pain. For example, they're hooked by the mouth, they are caught by the gills, they are clubbed and then left to suffocate. And now think with me, if animal welfare violations are frequent among land animals who have been studied for decades, can you imagine how fishes are treated? And fish farms or aquaculture is no better. The animals are crammed into net tanks in the sea or in inland tanks where they are pumped with antibiotics and growth promoters and are finally killed with painful methods when they reach a certain age or weight. So really, fish farms are no better than capture fishing in terms of animal suffering. Another issue I must emphasize is the local farm myth. For some reason, 99% of people are against factory farms, but most of them are completely okay with local farms or family-owned farms, which doesn't make any sense because, to start with, eating local animals does not help animals. Second, the fact that a farm is small or run by a family doesn't say anything about the way the animals are treated. Third, local farms can be are not necessarily small as people imagine. They can be large-scale farms too. And fourth, studies show that there is no straightforward relationship between herd size and animal welfare. Larger farms can either worsen or improve the animal's quality of life. For example, larger farms can have more resources to treat sick animals and implement animal welfare measures compared to smaller farms. So there is not a rule. And we must understand that animal farms, livestock transport companies, and slaughterhouses are businesses. They're not charities. So the animal industry literally derives money from animals. The animals are production units. So raising an animal improperly can cause the animal to become sick or die. And they are property. They are machines producing goods. So there is a positive financial side to animal welfare that we will discuss in more details later. But generally, farmers will do the minimum required by legislation for cost reasons, especially small farmers who have less resources. So it's important to understand that animal welfare legislation does not look to liberate animals from exploitation. They rather promote the continued exploitation of animals under certain standards, which of course is better than not having any kind of protection, but still, this is not enough. Can you imagine if these animals were cats or dogs? No one in the Western world would think this is okay. Now, this message is a key takeaway. Animal welfare can be good business because well-treated animals produce more. So let me give you an example. Think of an intensive pig farm, for example, where most females, called sows, are heavily confined. Their function is to generate offspring who will become meat. So can you imagine living in an airplane seat for months? Can you imagine being able only to sit down or stand up? You can then relate to the suffering of sows who spend months per year inside tight crates where they can barely move. You see, the industry typically follows the minimum welfare standards to which they can exploit the animals according to the law and still make a profit. Let's take the word of an expert. Paul Sundberg, veterinarian and former vice president of the United States National Pork Producers Council. Farmers treat their animals well because that's just good business. A sow doesn't even seem to know that she can turn. She wants to feel safe and eat, and she can do that very well in individual stalls. You can see the individual stalls in the picture. So, is this the kind of ethics we want to support? And by the way, most pigs consumed worldwide and in Ireland are raised in intensive farms. Whoever studied pigs or lived with them know they are curious, smart, and playful. They have individual personalities, they love to socialize, and they are really good at solving complex problems. Studies show that pigs are more intelligent than dogs and even small children. So the confinement of pigs, as we saw in the previous picture, is a big source of emotional and physical suffering. Respiratory problems due to high levels of ammonia in the sheds, gastrointestinal problems due to excessive grain consumption, boredom, depression, anxiety, aggressiveness, foot injuries because of the hard floors, and so on. So vets and farmers have to find a balance between welfare and profitability. So again, the industry will focus on the minimum welfare standards by which they can make money from the animals. And now let's see some specific examples where animal welfare is in the best interest of farmers. Chicken meat production. So for those who are not familiar with chicken farming, broilers are chickens raised for meat as opposed to egg-laying hens. They are all chickens, but they belong to different breeds. They have been genetically modified over decades for target characteristics. So the image people have in mind when they picture chicken farms is only one stage of chicken meat production. Here we are talking about an integrated industrial process composed of breeding farms, hatcheries, broiler farms, and slaughterhouses and processing facilities. So typically, the eggs are fertilized on breeding farms. Then the fertilized eggs are sent to hatcheries where they are kept under specific conditions until the chicks are born. And finally, a broiler farm buys chicks from hatcheries and fattens them up to slaughter weight. So even small producers are interconnected to a highly technological and large-scale system. So in the chicken industry, catching, loading, and transport of meat chickens or broilers must be done carefully to respect animal welfare standards. But this is not necessarily done for the sake of the animals, as we might have imagined. You see, only very small farms kill the animals on site. In most cases, the animals are loaded onto trucks and are sent to the slaughterhouse. And what the industry doesn't tell you is that stress and injury during pre-slaughter reduce the quality of their flesh. Think of farm workers catching the chickens and loading them into transport boxes. If the workers do it roughly or in a hurry, which is common, the animals can have their bones broken or even a wing or wattle ripped off. And this is actually very common. And then injured animals will, of course, mean bruises, hemorrhages, and even death. So the result is the slaughterhouse will pay less for the animals who are injured or even dead, and the retailers will pay less for the bruised meat. So animal welfare has to do with meat quality. Another example, broilers and layers are fed high-quality feed. Of course they are, because a balanced diet improves health and immunity, increases the conversion efficiency, and affects product quality. For example, the nutrient balance changes the color of the yolk and the cholesterol levels in eggs. So they're not fed high-quality feed out of mercy. It's because it's for cost reasons, for economic reasons, for production, because of production targets. Another example, shackling and stunning of chickens must be done carefully before slaughter to improve welfare levels. So after the chickens get to the slaughterhouse, they are shackled upside down along a processing line and are immersed in this electrified water bath to render them unconscious before they have their throats slit. But the underlying reason for the stunning and this process of stunning the birds before cutting their throats is called humane slaughter, okay? But the underlying reason for the stunning is that unconscious birds are easier to manipulate. It's all calculated. So another example, farm workers receive training on animal handling to improve welfare levels. Of course they do, because negative interactions between humans and animals affect the animal's performance. Think of a dairy cow, for example. If the worker relies on rough handling or shouts at the animal, the milking sessions will last longer because the animal will be scared. Studies show that there is a 30% variability in milk production between farms with the same herd size due to fearfulness levels. And now the most absurd example, weaning methods in cattle. Animal welfare scientists investigate ways to reduce the negative effects of separating cows and calves. However, the dairy industry and the beef industry use conflicting narratives, even though they are talking about the very same animals. So, dairy farms separate mother and baby as soon as possible, sometimes 30 minutes from birth. They claim that early weaning is better for the animals because maternal bond increases with time. So in the end, they suffer less, according to the industry. However, in beef farms, separation is done only after 6 months of age. And the industry claims that early weaning is bad for the animals because it hinders the development of the calf. So strange, isn't it? I mean, same animals, contradictory narratives. But the real reason is, it's actually obvious. In the dairy industry, the farmers do not want calves nursing their babies because the milk must be sold to humans. Meanwhile, in the beef industry, nursing for as long as possible makes the calf stronger, and stronger animals will produce more muscle, more meat. So the beef and dairy industry's narratives on animal welfare are conflicting because they have to find an explanation that fits their interests. So animal welfare guidelines are mostly about money, either as direct profit or brand reputation, usually both. So that's why the labels used by the industry are untruthful. Packaging depicting happy animals or evoking positive terms are ways to increase consumer trust. This marketing strategy puts the consumer's consciousness at ease about using animals. It normalizes animal use. So we're getting to the end of our presentation, but I want to discuss one more topic, which is, regardless of the treatment the animals receive, their destiny is the same. Let's picture 3 different rearing systems in egg production: battery cages, cage-free, and free range. So can you imagine not being able to raise your arms or open your arms your entire existence? Yeah, so that's the life of a battery caged hen. Battery cages are the traditional system where hens are confined to tight cages where they can barely move their whole productive lives. Most hens are raised this way in the whole world. Then in cage reproduction, the hens are not confined into cages, but they are not free to roam outdoors either. They are kept at all times inside crowded sheds with artificial lighting, breathing ammonia from their own excrements 24/7. So that's the life of a typical cage-free hen. And then free-range hens, they do have outdoor access for some hours during the day, although the amount of time can be very small, very short compared to the amount of time they spend indoors. And the quality of the outdoor space varies. For example, a barren patch of land is considered legal in some countries, for example, in the United States. But anyway, it's reasonable to think that free-range hens have a better quality of life, right? What we usually don't know is that all egg-laying hens are killed after 12 to 18 months because they are exhausted and can't lay the expected amount of eggs anymore. The industry calls these animals spent hens. So while broilers become prime cuts. Egg-laying hens become second-graded meat used in processed food for humans or pet food. In any egg production system, the role of hens is to generate offspring, to keep a constant herd, and lay eggs. So hens are really used as machines. Also, in any production system, male chicks are considered a byproduct because, of course, they don't lay eggs. So they are shredded alive. Yes, they are literally dropped to a grinder in many, many countries, or alternatively, they are suffocated to death using different methods. And again, these are standard practices followed worldwide. So again, the labels used in animal products are misleading. And while animal welfare standards are important because at least the animals have some protection, they do not solve the underlying moral issue of using sentient beings. Not to mention that legislation can be deliberately vague and welfare standards are prone to oversight. There aren't inspections done daily, for example, to check how the animals are being treated. So if you want to learn more about the differences across production systems and geographical regions and many other topics on food production and veganism, please have a look at my book called Food for Thought. This book is an exhaustive work of research based on my professional experience as a food engineer and scientist, nearly 800 peer-reviewed references, interviews with industry experts, and undercover investigations by Animal Equality. So all the sources for the topics we covered tonight can be found in the book. And also, if you want to watch videos or read reports from undercover investigations in animal farms, totally check the work of Animal Equality, We Animals Media, and Kind of World. So the goal of every vegan is to respect animals and inspire other people to do the same. And despite what some people say, being vegan is not a sacrifice at all. It's a joy. It's a life of much more connection, peace, and harmony on all levels. And what we really follow is nonviolence. And nonviolence means veganism. The very least we can do if we care about animals is to be vegan. So to really hammer the idea home, animal welfare regulates exploitation, while animal rights opposes exploitation, and vegans oppose the idea that animals are property to be used. We are against the exploitation of other sentient beings, regardless of the species. So my final message is there are only two sides when it comes to animal ethics. Either we oppose the commodification of animals by being vegan, or we directly support needless violence and oppression. And it's important that we make the compassionate choice for obvious reasons. So I hope this presentation was insightful, and I am free for questions if you have any.